production companies make these amazing videos, and then go, oh no, we need to think about some music and stuff, and it sort of like becomes a bit of a rush. But actually, when you think about it at the same time as, pre-production, and you start planning it and actually how the sound's going to work with the visuals, it elevates the video so much. And you'll know this if you've ever watched if you go in to watch some of the latest, like for instance, like the new James Bond trailer, and if you listen to the actual sound design on it and actually what's included over the top, it just takes it to another level.
Welcome to Audio Branding, the hidden gem of marketing. Sound plays a more important role in human behavior and our decision-making than you may realize. In this podcast, I'll help you understand the art and science of sound so you can better influence others in business and your life. I'm your host, Jodi Krangle. Let's delve a little deeper. This is the first part of my interview with Aaron Matthews. My next guest is an audio branding expert who has worked with some of the biggest media brands in the UK, including BBC Radio 1, Global Radio, and Bauer. He's fine-tuned his understanding of how consumers interact with brands at a content level, and the company he founded, Creative Fix, develops unique audio advertising content that's relevant, distinctive, and memorable. That's an important one. His name is Aaron Matthews, and I have no doubt he'll have a lot to say about the current state of the advertising industry, especially when it comes to sound. As always, if you have questions for my guest, you're welcome to reach out through the links in the show notes. And if you have questions for me, visit audiobrandingpodcast.com, where you'll find a lot of ways to get in touch. Plus, subscribing to the newsletter will let you know when the new podcasts are available. And now, here's my interview with Aaron Matthews. Thank you so much for being with me today here. I want to start off things by asking a sort of set placement question, I guess. I ask a lot of people this because I get some really interesting stories. So do you have an early memory of how sound moved you?
Yeah, I mean, my pretty earliest memory of it, and my sort of growing up kind of in our house, my mum and dad are massive music fans, and I think that was, I remember always, not us being around the telly, always us being around the kind of stereo, which sounds like really old-fashioned, like some kind of Victorian house, but it wasn't like that. But
that's okay. I'm older too.
like kind of like some kind of 80s ghetto blaster, yes, with my dad playing this like, amazing music from, people like INXS and, George Michael and all these incredible artists and stuff, which obviously when you listen to those in sort of in a room, and you've got, it's loud and you hear the amazing production on them and stuff. I think that was my sort of earliest memory of kind of just being really, really into music. And that's sort of carried on obviously through what I do now, and, and DJing and such like. And my love of music has definitely come from my parents. And that memory of being in the house kind of collectively as a family listening to music together is probably my earliest memory. And then as I sort of got older as well, and then maybe just kind of experimenting with the type of music that I like to listen to, and my tastes are pretty eclectic. I sort of moved from sort of house music, which is what I play as a DJ and what I'm a fan of, but also through to kind of classical stuff. And I remember when I was about 13 or 14, how you used to get like magazines that used to usually come with like attachments and kind of like CDs and like really exciting stuff. Yeah. I remember on one magazine, I'm not quite sure what the magazine was, but there was a free CD of The Planets by Holst, which is an amazing piece of classical music. If no one's ever heard it, it's like, it's up there with the greatest. And I remember hearing that and thinking, wow, what an amazing sound, and how emotional that music is and how it moves you. And I remember hearing that as a teenager and thinking, wow, this I've never heard anything like that before, and it was amazing. And I think that's probably sort of a collection of kind of my earliest memories.
Wonderful, yeah, and lots of great ones too. And I do remember the days when they used to send free CDs. Long time ago now.
Yeah, exactly. I know, God, showing our age, jeez.
That's okay. Yeah, this whole digital media thing has, I mean, we've probably seen it develop from pretty early on, I would imagine. And you say that are you still a DJ or were you doing that previously?
Yeah, it's just purely a hobby. I tend to DJ on the side, and friends' parties and all that kind of stuff. And and it's I've played out and stuff before numerous times, sort of when I've been in London, in the UK, and it's great fun. It's great. It's that. It's quite there's if you've ever sort of done it and ever played out in that situation, I'd imagine it's very much like acting and being in front of an audience, which is what you're doing. It's a very sort of quite a rush from it. It's quite an adrenaline rush. And I think it's
sing,
that.
So yeah.
Yeah, well, it's that thing, isn't it?
It's the same thing.
You're at the simplest form, you're altering someone's emotions through music, which is what I do, in my day job. But also to take that out and play music and seeing people's reaction and seeing how it affects people and what they do. It's like that's really powerful, and that's why music and sound to me is just so so good.
Yeah. There's a lot that goes into figuring out what the next song should be, I guess. Just to keep people dancing or to slow them down or whatever. I mean, you can pretty much dictate how they're going to react by the music you play. It's it would be a rush, yeah.
and the pressure as well. I think the pressure for me it's getting that next song right and trying to figure out what that is and having that kind of knowledge of all of your music and all of your library to kind of think, right, what can I do next to better that or to change the mood or whatever. And I think that's super powerful.
Yeah, definitely. And I know from performances that I've done that are live, it is definitely a rush because it's a communal thing. I mean, it's very much, you're dictating what's going out into that audience, but at the same time, they're reacting or not reacting. And so it's a shared experience in a way, which I think
absolutely.
Is really important. Yeah. So your background is clearly in music and audio. So how did you get interested in doing what you're doing now? I know that you are in creative fix and you're working in ads and all of that. But how did that whole thing happen?
So my kind of career in audio started in radio, in commercial radio in the UK. I was probably started a bit before that, maybe at school radio level. I think I did some kind of school radio, and then had a sort of massive interest in again music and sound, and I think that sort of presentation, wanting to be on the radio and actually wanting to be a sort of presenter back then, which I eventually got to do a little bit. But actually I started as a producer, and I would I was about 16, 17 at a radio station, and I would play in all the recorded shows and what we call tech op back in the day, where we're playing in all the ads and all the sweepers and the jingles and all the kind of pre-recorded presenter links. And that then sort of evolved to making production, making trailers, making all the imaging for the radio station, and then through to some on-air work as well. And then managed to sort of move my way up through the Capital Radio Group in the UK, ended up working at Capital Radio in London, and then producing the big sort of top 40 show that we have in the UK, which goes across all the radio stations there. And then did a bit of time at Radio 1 and some other London radio stations as well. So that's where it started, really. And it's kind of been a really nice evolution sort of from that. And now, when we started kind of Creative Fix, we started working with, the likes of Spotify and a lot of their brand ads. And that was sort of an evolution for sort of all the things that I learned in radio and all of the things that we were taught about kind of quality and sound recording and, how to make things sound great in the studio and, best practices, all that stuff is in place in what we do now. And we're sort of taking that forward to digital audio, but with all the really exciting tech behind us as well, where we can, make all sorts of interesting ads, using the latest tech. So yeah, that's sort of how it started, really.
And I think when we spoke last, you'd mentioned that there is a difference between radio and digital audio creative. I'm curious as to if you could explain that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the simplest terms, radio is, from its conception is a shared listening experience. We will sort of remember those kind of stock images we have of, when radio was first conceived, and we would all, as a family kind of sit around the radio and listen to it, a little bit like what I was talking about at our family home previously. radio is a very much shared experience. And even now in, 2022, we are listening, maybe slightly differently when it comes to, on smart speakers, but, it's collectively, in the family home or, a family environment, potentially in the car, potentially in the workplace, and advertising hasn't really changed on radio because of that. When it comes to advertising, you are a commercial within an ad break full of lots of other commercials, and you need to be heard. So the general style of radio ads they're pretty shouty and loud, and they want to grab your attention from across the room and, throughout all these other ads. Where digital audio, we know from research that over 80% of people listen in their headphones. So we've got this really, for the first time ever when it comes to audio ads, a really unique position where we've got the listener's full attention. And now more than ever, we've got really great headphones. So most people listen, with some form of kind of noise cancelling. So actually, it's not just headphones; it's sort of headphones 2.0. We've got, more than ever we can do in terms of sound, and that presents sort of lots of really interesting opportunities for us from a purely production point of view, and what we can do with sound generally. And actually, we can do things with sound that we never could in radio, because you'd miss them.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is like speaking directly into someone's ear, right? Are you looking for ways to improve your company's or podcast's impact? You'd be surprised how powerful the use of an intentional audio branding strategy can be. Want to know more? I have a free downloadable PDF that gives you my 5 tips for implementing an intentional audio strategy at voiceoversandvocals.com/audio-branding-strategy. That location does ask to put you on a mailing list, just to send you updates on when the new podcasts come out. But if you really don't want to give your email out, I understand. Just contact me directly. My email is all over my website, and I'll make sure you get that PDF without needing to sign up anywhere. If you do sign up, though, you also get access to a resources section called The Studio, where I have videos, white papers and PDFs, discounts from my guests, and snippets of audio from my guests that no one else gets to hear. So maybe it's worth your while. Totally up to you. And of course, if you're looking for voiceovers, you can get in touch with me about that too. Now, back to the podcast. I do a lot of iHeart and Pandora radio ads, digital radio ads. And the way that they want that spoken from, as a difference between actual radio ads is very much more intimate. It's very much more right against your ear almost. They want you to be speaking to that one person who's listening in their headphones. And it's a really interesting difference in dynamic. Yeah.
And I don't think it's just voiceovers. I think that's sort of an evolution from kind of podcast ads and host reads where, it's very contextually relevant to the show. You've got hosts that aren't necessarily selling you stuff. They're talking about it contextually within their programming, and they're doing it in their style. Exactly. And that's some of the most effective, and it's some of the most premium ad spots you can buy when you buy, host read content. But I think the ads are doing that in podcasting too. And it's very, very obvious when you hear a radio ad in a podcast environment, because it's not meant to be there. But I don't think it's just the voiceover. I think there's so much more we can do with sound than we can do in radio. You can put people in different places through using really great soundscapes, stuff that you would never be able to hear on the radio. And you can put someone on a desert island and you've got that beach sound effect and waves lapping up against you, and that stuff's really powerful, because before you even speak one word of copy, or before the voiceover even starts speaking, you have, you've transported someone somewhere through their imagination. And that's the stuff that really excites us. And actually, sound is very underused, I still think, in advertising. We're obsessed with.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think it's a legacy radio thing. I think, because if you think about radio ads, you can't have that silence. You need to kind of.
Well, there's just such poor quality. I mean, the audio quality of it getting over a transmitted radio signal is just so much less than the streaming podcasts that we're listening to. I mean, even digitally, which isn't as great as vinyl or whatever else, but radio quality is pretty awful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're we're still kind of focusing on cramming as much kind of copy and as much voiceover into 30-second ads as possible. And actually, some of the best ads that I've heard are ads that have space and have soundscapes and you sound really well and sound design really well. And if you think about it in these terms, you know, if you imagine you obviously listen to a podcast which is full of speech, wouldn't it be great if the commercials are slightly opposite to that and actually have that space and have those gaps where there's less going on, which grabs your attention?
Yeah, good
point.
Otherwise,
you're sort of going from speech to speech. Actually, if you did something slightly different with the ad, especially in mid-roll points, that could be really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It would be a nice contrast. Relaxation for the ears. Yeah. I guess the idea is that there's something to be said for creating theater of the mind when it comes to digital broadcast as opposed to radio. And then, you know, TV, of course, or video is very much you're explaining what's happening on the screen as opposed to explaining what the sounds are, because it's much more visual. So I guess in the sense of digital audio for podcasting and that kind of thing, it's almost like you're describing the sounds as opposed to the visual, where you wouldn't even have that opportunity in a radio commercial.
Yep. And I think that's where, you know, we can use sound better in digital audio, but actually using the sounds. And, you know, that then goes on to using things like, you know, 3D audio, which is a technique where, you know, you can hear sound in 360 degrees if you're wearing headphones, if it's mixed in the right way.
Is that what they call spatial audio?
Spatial audio, binaural audio. It has lots of different names. Yeah. It's you know, Sony have a product out at the moment called 360 Reality Audio, which is they're reimagining a lot of their back catalogue music into 360, but they also have some kind of hardware speaker products which throw sound around the room, not quite in the same way that you'd hear it in your headphones, but it's quite, you know, it's kind of sort of classed as spatial audio. And there's some really good examples on YouTube. If you search things like 3D audio barbershop is a really good one, where you're sitting in a barber's chair and you hear the sound of the clippers come around the back of your head. And it's very, very kind of visceral sound. It sort of makes you kind of, you know, move out the way because it's so true to life. And that is probably the sweet spot when it comes to digital audio advertising and to, you know, to use sound properly within that space, because you can do stuff, like we said, that you can't do on radio that gets an amazing reaction. And we do lots of stuff in 360 and 3D, you know, reimagining kind of like movie trailers and stuff. We remix those in 360, and you can imagine for like horror trailers that becomes quite an interesting experience. And there's there's some really good examples of it. And we did a big campaign with Tourism New Zealand where we sort of took listeners on a kind of 360 journey through the sort of soundscapes of New Zealand, and, you know, waterfalls, and, you know, kayaking through kind of ravines, and, you know, hiking, and you'd hear all the wind in certain places. And it's a really, really rich audio experience.
And that was audio only? You weren't actually displaying
audio
the visual?
Only, yep. No. Okay. So all we did is we did some really, we had an amazing New Zealand voiceover, and sort of really descriptive language, descriptive scripting, but then just complemented and punctuated beautifully with some really rich sound design.
Very nice. Yeah. So that's fantastic, being able to create soundscapes out of, you know, digital nothingness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty awesome. Yeah. I know that you do all sorts of work at Creative Fix, though, right? So you also do radio, but you do TV and video as well. So in that kind of a context, where does the sound come in?
Yeah, so we do audio for visuals. Yeah, so we kind of do audio for TV advertising, but also, you know, video commercials, so, you know, online stuff, and, you know, and it's sort of that kind of sound design that happens after the visuals are made usually. And the interesting thing about video is that video is, you know, with audio on video sort of becomes a bit of an afterthought. It's sort of the last thing that everyone thinks of.
Oh yeah, that's why I have this podcast. Yes,
exactly
what
that.
This is for.
You know, it's almost like you know, production companies make these amazing videos, and then go, oh no, we need to think about some music and stuff, and it sort of like becomes a bit of a rush. But actually, when you think about it at the same time as, you know, pre-production, and you start planning it and actually how the sound's going to work with the visuals, it elevates the video so much. And you'll know this if you've ever watched a, you know, if you you know, go in to watch, you know, some of the latest, like for instance, like the new James Bond you know, trailer, and if you listen to the actual sound design on it and actually what's included over the top, it just takes it to another level. And there's stuff in there that, unless you sort of know and you hear it again and again, you don't realize that it's like, okay, this is, you know, they add so much into it to make it really pop. I think sound is super important in video, and I think it's not thought about enough. And actually, when you think about it, along with, you know, the actual production of what the visuals are doing, that's where it can become really powerful and actually really pop, and actually probably, you know, stand up against other stuff. And, you know, if you look at platforms like TikTok, for instance, you know, their whole thing is about, it's a sound on experience. And, you know, nobody watches, you know, unlike other social media, potentially like on Instagram videos and Facebook and stuff, nobody watches TikTok with the sound down. It's almost sound first in a way, because actually sometimes, and pretty much a lot of the time, that dictates what's happening in the visuals. Certainly when you look at things like, you know, TikTok dances and such, like, but they, you know, their company sort of, you know, branding and sort of point of difference is that it's a sound on experience. And I think that's interesting. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, and how, you know, that's going to develop over time.
Thank you so much to the people that have taken the time to leave an honest review of this podcast. I know it takes a bit of effort to do, and I know how busy and, let's face it, kind of stressful our lives are right now. So it means a lot that you take the time to leave some feedback. Ran MCK writes, "How important is sound?" Jodi covers all frequencies of sound through her research and her guests. Her interviews with Tal and Hamish provide insight on how audio can be heard, not just listened to. Jodi's voice keeps you listening and want to hear more. I have become a better listener. Thank you, Ran MCK. I really appreciate your kind words. Now, back to the show. Yeah, it is definitely getting more popular, I think, as people understand that this is an underutilized area. But how do you convince your clients that this is important? I mean, you've said it makes it pop, but, you know, they're looking at dollars and cents as well, right? So how does this translate to them, do you think? And how can you convince them to pay more attention to this?
I think there's a whole conversation around audio identity generally at the moment, and I think that's one thing that is massively underused. And, you know, in the most simplest form of audio branding, if you look at someone like McDonald's and I'm Loving It. Now, the great thing about this is that you can have the TV running in the lounge or whatever, and you're in another room and you hear that sonic trigger, that I'm Loving It, da 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 da. You know exactly what it is. And the reason why that's so powerful is because McDonald's are really good at layering that across all of their assets, whether that's, you know, radio ads, digital ads, TV ads.
It's very consistent, yeah. Very
consistent. And, you know, you look at, the likes of Intel, another good example of the amazing sonic logo that has. That's where brands can really utilize sound. And I think there is a whole thing about audio identity, and it's not just about sonic identity, it's about being consistent with your voiceovers. And again, McDonald's are very, very good at this. You know, TV ads with the same voiceover as digital ads, as radio ads. You know, there's certainly in the UK, the McDonald's ad has been consistently voiced by the same person for a long time. Again, same at home with O2, a big telephone communications brand. Voiced by the same actor, Sean Bean, for almost 20 years.
Sean Bean, really? Cool.
Yeah. I mean, the best VO gig in history, right? He has voiced it since it launched, and I don't. Wow. It must be near on 20 years, if not more.
Wow.
But he's voiced every single asset, and it's like that's how you start getting some consistency with and brand recall when you keep doing stuff the same, in terms of making sure there's some synergy across all your channels. But that's down to music as well, and like I said, and those kind of sonic IDs that we hear as well.
Out of curiosity, how many times do you find that your clients will go out and get a music component, like a song or something from, say, an independent artist, as opposed to looking for the most popular song of the moment or getting something in 5 minutes from a music directory. The reason I ask this is because you're talking about consistency, and one of the things that consistency would be helped by is having a consistent piece of music and owning that consistent piece of music, which is I kind of think that's part of a big problem that a lot of companies are dealing with right now, and that is the artist that does this song for you could do something really silly or bad or whatever, and then you're associated with that song. Or it's a well-known song that you have to pay millions of dollars for, or you don't think about it at all, and you put a music directory, like a music licensed piece of music on your track or whatever on your ad, and then your competitor uses the same song because they can. Or not even a competitor, but someone in a completely different industry uses the same piece of music. And then what's your branding?
Yeah, it does happen. I mean, I think there's some big TV commercials where, there's been a crossover with using similar tracks, and it does create brand confusion. I think, it doesn't happen that often. We always advise, our clients, when we look at things like audio identity, to look at composing a piece of music that is, works for their brand, has synergy with their brand, but also is exclusive to them. And then what we tend to do is when we look at, working with a brand and looking at their audio identity, everything from voiceovers to sonic identity to music, we create potentially different mixes for different channels. So we might make a mix for telly, and we might make a mix of the same sonic logo, the same sounds and the same piece of music, which is just done in a slightly different way and arranged in a slightly different way for different channels. And that works really well because you have that sort of consistent sort of sonic branding throughout it, but in different places you hear it in a slightly different way.
Yeah. So it's more of an identity as opposed to just a tacked on bit of music.
Exactly. Yeah. And it works depending on where you're listening. You wouldn't potentially want a really heavy piece of music which is running through a digital audio ad, but you might want something that's a bit more punchier for TV or radio. And again, having different mixes of the same track works really well.
Yeah, definitely. So you do actually craft the sound for a client? Like, do you do audio branding over there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we're working with a couple of clients at the moment, and we're looking at, they're sort of really open to kind of how we can kind of help them kind of cut through in this space. And, we're working with one company who has an amazing visual identity. They look brilliant, and they've got a really great product that we are going to hopefully bring to life in audio for them. And they've got a very, very clear visual identity, which makes it really easy for us because we can look at that and go, right, we know how to turn this into an audio and a sonic identity for them. And that again is through, picking the right voiceover, making sure that we're kind of delivering kind of voiceovers in the right way that's really authentic to them, making sure that we've got a really nice kind of sonic logo, which is, perfectly sums up their brand, but then also looking at how we can then knit that through the music choices and potentially, for different areas and different channels that they advertise on.
This has been part 1 of our interview. I hope you'll tune in next week for part 2. Well, that's the end of this episode. Thanks for listening. And if you like what you heard, why not tell a friend about this podcast? It's available in all the usual locations. Until next time.